Good morning. Today we look at the summary and detailed explanation of the poem My Last Duchess by Robert Browning. This, as you may be aware, is a perfect example of a dramatic monologue. First, a look at the summary. Robert Browning's My Last Duchess. My Last Duchess is a dramatic monologue written by Victorian poet Robert Browning in 1842. In the poem, the Duke of Ferrara uses a painting of his former wife as a conversation piece. The Duke speaks about his former wife's perceived inadequacies to a representative of the family of his bride-to-be, revealing his obsession with controlling others in the process. Browning uses this compelling psychological portrait of a despicable character to critique the objection of women and abuses of power. My Last Duchess, the summary. The speaker, that is the Duke of Ferrara, directs the attention of a guest to a painting of his former wife, the Duchess of Ferrara, which hangs on the wall. The Duke praises the painting for looking so lifelike and then remarks on how hard the painter, Fra Pandolf, worked on it. The Duke asks the guest to sit and look at the work. The Duke then explains that he deliberately mentioned the name of the painter because strangers like the emissary always look at the Duchess's painted face with its deep, passionate and earnest glance and turn to the Duke, and only the Duke, since only he pulls back the curtain that reveals the painting, and acts as though they would ask, if they dared, how an expression like that came into her face. The Duke reiterates, means repeats, that the guest isn't the first person to ask this question. The Duke continues by saying that it was only his presence that brought that look into the painted eyes of the Duchess, or the blush of happiness into her painted cheek. He suggests that perhaps Fra Pandolf had happened to compliment her by saying, and this is a line from the text to quote, "Her shawl drapes over her wrist too much," unquote, or, quote again, "Paint would never recreate the faint half blush that is fading on her throat," unquote. The Duke insists that the former Duchess thought that polite comments like those were reason enough to blush, and criticizes her in a halting way for being too easily made happy or impressed. He also claims that she liked everything and everyone she saw, although his description suggests that she was ogling everyone who crossed her path. The Duke objects that, to his former Duchess, everything was the same and made her equally happy, whether it was a brooch or present from him that she wore at her chest, the sun setting in the west, a branch of cherries which some interfering person snapped off a tree in the orchard for her, or the white mule she rode on around the terrace. He claims that she would say the same kind words or give the same blush in response to all of them. The Duke also objects to her manner of thanking men, although he struggles to describe his concerns. Specifically, he complains that she values his pedigree and social position, his 900-year-old name, as equally important to anyone else's gifts to her. The Duke rhetorically asks whether anyone could actually lower themselves enough to argue with someone about their behavior. The Duke imagines a hypothetical situation in which he would confront the former Duchess. He says that even if he were good with words and were able to clearly say, inverted commas open, this characteristic of yours disgusts me, commas close, or commas open again, here you did too little or too much, commas close. And if the former Duchess had let herself be degraded by changing, instead of being stubborn and making excuses, that even then the acting of confronting her would be beneath him, and he refuses to ever lower himself like that. The Duke then returns to his earlier refrain about his former wife's indiscriminate happiness and complains to his guest that while the Duchess did smile at him whenever they passed, she gave everyone else the same smile as well. The Duke explains that she began smiling at others even more, so he gave orders and all her smiles stopped forever, presumably because he had her killed. Horrifying thought that. Now she only lives on in the painting. The Duke then asks the guests to stand up and go with him to meet the rest of the guests downstairs. He also says that the Count, revealed here as the guest's master and the father of the Duke's prospective bride-to-be, is so known for his generosity in matters of money that no request the Duke could make for a dowry could be turned down. In other words, he's assuming that a dowry will be given to him. The Duke also adds quickly that he has always insisted since the beginning of the discussions that the Count's beautiful daughter and not the dowry is his primary objective. The Duke ends his speech by demanding that he and the Count's emissary go downstairs together, and on their way he directs the emissary's attention to a statue of the god Neptune taming a seahorse, which is a rare work of art that Claus of Innsbruck cast in bronze specifically for him. This was the summary of the poem. Now we'll take a look at the line-by-line explanation of My Last Duchess. Lines 1 to 5. I quote the text. That is my last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that piece of wonder now. Fra Pandol's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. Will it please you sit and look at her? The explanation goes like this. From the poem's opening line, Browning shows the Duke of Ferrara's obsession with possessing and objectifying women. The Duke is describing a painting of his former wife rather than the woman herself, but he still describes the painting itself as My Last Duchess, thereby eroding the differences between the art and the woman who inspired it. Both are essentially the same in the Duke's mind, or at least he had preferred it if this were so. The Duke personifies the painting throughout this passage, both by saying, there she stands, quoting from the text, as though the Duchess herself and not her image in the painting is standing against the wall, and, quote from the text again, will it please you sit and look at her, close quote, instead of asking the messenger to look at it, because ultimately they are looking at the painting or the painting. This again suggests that he views the woman and the work of art as one and the same. The Duke also makes it clear that he cares for the status of the painting, for the status the painting can give him, and not for the nostalgia or memories about his former wife. He remarks on the artistry of the painting in seeming so lifelike, inverted commas open, looking as if she were alive, commas close, rather than on missing her, since the woman herself, as we will soon find out, has died. Likewise, he describes the artwork as, commas open and close, a piece and a wonder, and brags about how busily the famous Fra Pandolf worked to paint it, in a move calculated to impress the emissary with the quality of his art collection, and therefore his wealth. It is also worth noting that although the Duke focuses on Fra Pandolf's hands, there is no mention of his former wife's hands, or, in fact, on any part of her body in this section, an absence that suggests the Duke's interest in the painting is monetary rather than its sentimental worth. These lines also reveal the Duke's subtle control of conversations and physical spaces. The Duke is clearly guiding the emissary through his estate and art collection like a tour guide, telling him that what to admire, what to think about it, and even when to sit. By having the emissary sitting while he stands, the Duke literally elevates himself above his guest and shows him the power hierarchy that he tries to preserve in all his interactions with others. The poem's opening also shows that Browning is controlling the meter and rhyme scheme of the poem as carefully as the Duke controls the conversation and the space. When read aloud, the poem sounds almost conversational in tone, and people are often surprised to realize it consists of iambic pentameter rhyming couplets. The many enjambed lines, such as line 2 and 3, and I quote, "I call that piece of wonder now," make sentences extend well beyond the confines of the lines, and the frequent casuras introduce the natural pauses into the middle of the lines, as with "looking as if she were alive" in line 2. By having so many caesuras and so few end-stop lines, Browning de-emphasizes the lines themselves with their 5 feet and their rhyming couplets. He instead creates a style that sounds more akin to prose. Lines 5 to 13. Quoting the text first, "I said, Fra Pandolf by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance, but to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I, and seemed as they would ask me, if they durst, how such a glance came there. So, not the first are you to turn and ask thus." Unquote. In these lines, the Duke uses the picture of the Duchess to brag even more about his power. He repeats the name of the artist to hammer home to his guest that he can afford to commission works from such an important painter, and also to suggest that Fra Pandolf's skill is the reason for the depth and passion of the Duchess' facial expression. However, the Duke also uses the picture to brag about his control and power over the painting and over his audience. The Duke mentions that he put curtains over the painting so that only he can reveal or conceal the portrait at will, completely dictating who can view it and when. He is also very aware of his power, given that he harps on his own actions by saying I twice in line 10, when he mentions that, inverted commas open, no one puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I. The Duke also makes it clear that he has had this conversation about the Duchess with others several times. Since the emissary is, open inverted commas, not the first, close commas, to wonder at the painting's facial expression. In mentioning that others have been in the emissary's position, the Duke reminds the guest that he is not special or unique, and perhaps that other families have sent representatives to argue over dowries before him. These factors together make it easy to see why the Duke's guests fear him and only ask him questions if they durst, commas open and close, means if they dare. He is an expert in making his audience feel intimidated by his power, even in something as simple as discussing a painting. Browning manipulates the lengths of lines and sentences with as much control as the Duke manipulates the emissary. This entire passage contains only one sentence. In fact, although it is broken up with parenthetical remarks and semicolons. By writing such lengthy sentences, Browning suggests how much the Duke loves the sound of his own voice and how much he dislikes sharing the conversational floor with anyone else. Browning also demonstrates the Duke's love of control through typographical details. He enclosed the Duke's description of the curtain that hides the painting of the Duchess in parentheses, means in brackets. This punctuation echoes the curtains that surround the painting. Each parenthesis is like one of the curtains, having been pulled back to reveal the sentence about curtains being pulled back. Lines 13 to 19. To quote, Sir, it was not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess' cheek. Perhaps Fra Pandolf chanced to say, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much, or paint one must never hope to reproduce the faint half flush that dies along the throat. The Duke begins to air his supposed grievances about his former wife, complaints that reflect more poorly on the Duke than they do on the Duchess. The Duke's initial objection is that things other than her husband would make the Duchess blush or have a spot of joy on her cheek. By saying that it wasn't her husband's presence only that made her blush, the Duke implies that he and he alone should be allowed to do so, and suggests that she behaved inappropriately. This hints at his controlling and domineering nature. However, instead of providing examples of her flirtatiousness, the Duke then provides sample flirtatious statements Fra Pandolf might have said to the Duchess. Notice, might have said. The Duke is just assuming. Parenthesis open, paint must never hope to reproduce her blush, comma, brackets close. Yet instead of blaming the painter for flirting with his wife, the Duke blames his wife for blushing in response to this flirtation. With this example, Browning hints that the Duke's interpretation of events is suspect. The Duke's criticisms of his wife reveal more about his own character than hers. What is more, though the Duke uses these examples to complain about his former wife, he also indirectly praises her in them. One of Fra Pandolf's hypothetical quotations lauds the Duchess' beauty by saying that paintings wouldn't do her loveliness justice. Essentially, then, the Duke claims that a famous painter said that the Duchess is more beautiful than any work of art. This claim shows that the Duke still boasts about the Duchess and her appearance, as though she herself were a work of art that can reflect well upon him and his status, even while he insults her personality. This passage also marks an instance of extended enjambment. The enjambment could be interpreted at least two ways. First, since the content of these lines spills over beyond their boundaries, the enjambment could seem to demonstrate the Duke's getting carried away with jealousy over his former wife's perceived transgressions. Neither the boundaries of the lines nor the rules of decorum or appropriate behavior can contain him. Second, the enjambment combined with the many caesuras subtly obscures the line boundaries and rhymes, the components that control and structure verse. They make such components less obvious in the same way that the Duke hides his true motivation, an obsession with control. Lines 19 to 24. I quote the text. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. She had a heart, how shall I say, that soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Here the Duke implies that his former wife was unfaithful. But Browning suggests that the Duke is actually just confusing her kindness with infidelity. The Duke insists that the Duchess blushed at comments like Fra Pandolf's because she was flirting and wanted the attention, when she was just as likely being friendly and polite. The Duke also appears to be grasping for words. For example, how shall I say, when describing his primary objection to his former wife, as though he were trying to find a way to euphemistically explain her crime. In particular, by insisting that she liked, inverted commas open, whatever she looked on, commas close, and that, commas open again, her looks went everywhere, commas close. He seems to say that she sought out people to ogle and that her sexual appetite was insatiable. The Duke's repetition of the word too soon made glad, and too easily impressed, further hammers home the idea that her desires are excessive. In fact, the passage is full of words containing doubled or repeated letters. For example, stuff, calling, shall, too, soon, impressed, and looks. These words have been used in the text. And this extreme repetition emphasizes the idea of her excess even more. In the passage, Browning yet again uses caesura and enjambment to obscure the ending of each line. Obscure means to hide. The first three lines of the passage have no punctuation at the end of them, which causes each line to spill over into the next, as though the iambic pentameter were expansive enough to contain the Duchess' excesses. However, a closer look at the wording shows a different narrative. The Duke blames his former wife for blushing because he seems to believe that blushing is voluntary, since he says that, to quote from the text, she called up, unquote, her blush. Blushing is actually involuntary. In other words, it happens of its own. You cannot initiate it. But more importantly, blushing can also be caused by modesty or embarrassment, meaning that his claim that her blushing is provocative is questionable at best. Thus far, the Duke has merely given his guest an example of a woman blushing at being told she is beautiful, and then being glad and too easily made happy, none of which are examples of infidelity or really any transgression at all. Lines 25 to 31. Quoting the text, "Sir, it was all one. My favour at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherries some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode with round the terrace, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush at least." The Duke keeps trying to justify his disapproval of the Duchess, but Browning shows yet more holes in the Duke's argument. The Duke particularly objects to the fact that he did not receive sufficiently preferential treatment from his former wife. Inverted commas open. It was all one, he says, inverted commas close. He cites several things that would inspire her to say kind words or to blush, including a gift, most likely a brooch, from him which she wore near her chest, a sunset, cherries from the orchard, and riding a mule on their terrace. Instead of unfaithfulness or even immodest behavior, the Duchess' only crimes are being too modest, polite, and happy. Ironically, many of the things he cites are only possible because of their marriage. The cherries come from their orchard. The terrace she rides the mule on is part of their estate, and she is wearing the gift from him. So she clearly does appreciate and enjoy aspects of their life. To him, however, anything that makes her happy that is not directly by his order is inappropriate. And he believes she is essentially cheated on him with the sun, some cherries, and a mule. Strange man indeed. This extremely controlling attitude, Browning suggests, is an extension of the objectification of women. In other words, women are not people with personalities. Women are objects, possessions, to be dealt with any which way the man likes. In the poem's opening, the Duke viewed the painting of his former wife as having worth not as a sentimental reminder of the woman herself, but rather as a marker of status and a method of controlling and intimidating, meaning frightening others. This passage reflects the same attitude. The Duke does not care about the Duchess herself or her happiness. He only cares about her as a decorative object he can show off to emphasize his own status. Her smiling at sunsets or eating fruit is something that would be for her own fulfillment and is therefore too autonomous and out of his control. Lines 31 to 34. She thanked men good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift. The Duke explains the issue with social class that underlies his frustration. The Duke objects to the Duchess' kindness to all because he believes that his own aristocratic status, his, to quote the text, his gift of a 900 years old name, unquote, is proof of his inherent superiority to everyone else, and that as a result, he should be treated in a superior fashion. It is also worth noting that the Duke considers his marriage and thus his sharing of the title and name with the Duchess to be a gift. In his mind then, marrying her was practically a favor for which she should always be grateful and eternally in his debt. Essentially, the Duchess is not unfaithful, but rather too egalitarian. Egalitarian means believing in the equality of the people, equality of class, in other words. The idea of her treating others with generosity that isn't parceled out in accordance with someone's social station is so unthinkable and unspeakable to the Duke that he stumbles over his attempts to put words to it. He interrupts himself several times, as noted by the dashes, repeats the words thanked and gift, and even says, I know not how. His confusion also disrupts the meter. She thanked men good, but thanked. The dash between men and good is a caesura that occurs in the middle of the iambic foot that contains a metrical hiccup that brings the rapid movement of the poem stumbling to a temporary halt. While the Duke's verbal stumbling can be read as a genuinely stunned disbelief at the Duchess' actions, it can also be read as another example of his love of controlling others and how they view him. The Duke's earlier comments show that he has given this spiel to other guests in the past. He says the guest to whom he is speaking is not the first. So it is fair to assume that he has spoken of his horror at his former wife's actions before. He's openly critical about her. That's the strange thing, even in front of strangers. If he has choreographed the scene enough to put curtains and a bench in front of the painting, then why wouldn't he have scripted his actual comments about the Duchess as well? If so, then this is another example of his love of control and power. He even controls the moments where he pretends to have lost control of his sentences. Lines 34 to 43. To quote, who would stoop to blame this sort of trifling? Even had you skill in speech, which I have not, or to make your will quite clear to such as one and say, just this or that in you disgusts me. Here you miss or there exceed the mark. And if she let herself be lessoned so, nor plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse, even then would be some stooping, and I choose never to stoop. In these halting, rambling lines, the Duke reveals the fear underlying his objections to the Duchess. He insists that even if the Duchess did not stand up for or justify herself, it would have been beneath him to tell the Duchess about his frustrations. So he chose to stay silent. That he was aware that she might have argued back and refused to be lessened shows his worry that he actually could not control her as easily as he can control the painting of her in his estate. There weren't simple curtains he could hide the Duchess behind if she were, to quote, set her wits, unquote, to him. To the Duke, who's obsessed with manipulating and dominating others, even the idea of his degree of autonomy on the Duchess's part is a challenge to his authority. As a result, the only way to maintain authority is not to verbally engage at all, although he does take drastic action in the other ways, as the next section demonstrates. It is also telling that the Duke's imagined discussion with the Duchess consists of a series of insults or instructions, similar to the way a particularly harsh master would talk to a servant. He imagines telling her that she disgusts him in multiple ways and that she either falls short of expectations or does too much. In other words, he's never happy with what she did. Essentially, then, what he wants to change about her is everything. He wants her to be nothing more than a passive, pretty face for him to show off at parties, which is precisely what he does with the painting. In this section, as in the previous one, Browning has the Duke metrically trip in a few spots. Take the line, "This sort break of try, break, fling, even had you skill." This line still has the expected 5 feet, but the caesura in the form of a question mark after trifling puts a break in between the unstressed and stressed part of the iamb. This pattern occurs 2 more times in this section. The semicolon caesuras in me, semicolon here in line 38, and stooping, semicolon and in line 42. These semicolons are the pauses, the breaks, the caesuras. These irregularities could be read several ways. Browning could have created these supposed glitches to confirm the Duke's claim that he lacks, to quote, skill in speech, unquote. Conversely, Browning could be showing readers that the Duke's confusion enacted by the metrical hiccups is as deliberate an act and performance as is the Duke's pulling apart the curtains to reveal the painting. Other possible readings including Browning splitting the iambic feet to reflect the impending split between the Duke and the Duchess, or Browning going down a form of metaphorical violence to the iamb to foreshadow the violence of the Duke may have done to the Duchess. Lines 43 to 47. "Oh, sir, she smiled no doubt whenever I passed her, but who passed without Lines 43 to 47. "Oh, sir, she smiled no doubt whenever I passed her, But who passed without much the same smile? This grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. There she stands as if alive. In this passage, Browning shows the Duke's overzealous response to a perceived threat to his authority. The Duke explains that while the Duchess would smile at him every time they saw each other, it was not a sufficiently different smile from the smiles she gave others. And after a series of these not sufficiently distinguished smiles, he had her either killed or sent away. To quote, then all small smiles stopped together, unquote. Essentially, then he had her punished because she had made happy by things beyond her husband and because he feared her standing up to him. Although the Duke does not directly state that he ordered her death, it is very strongly implied. First, after several long sentences throughout the poem, the Duke says four extremely concise, terse sentences. Terse means short and clipped sentences. 1. This grew. 2. I gave commands. 3. Then all smiles stopped together. And 4. There she stands as if alive. The short clipped sentences, which themselves cut lines into shorter segments, echo the Duchess's life being clipped short. Additionally, the Duke uses the juxtaposition of her stopped smiles and the painting that makes her look as if alive to hint more directly to the fact that she is now dead thanks to his commands. Juxtaposition means to put two contrasting elements side by side in order to highlight their differences. Why would Browning have the Duke implicitly admit to having his wife killed when speaking to the man here to negotiate on behalf of his future bride? Perhaps because the Duke is deliberately intimidating the emissary to get a higher dowry in exchange for the bride. Throughout the poem, the Duke has orchestrated the space and conversation to appear inflexible and imposing, and to literally stand above the emissary. The Duke has already said that he will refuse to stoop or to be beneath others, and that he will have people killed for not sufficiently praising and respecting his 900 years old name. With that in mind, the Duke's story becomes a warning to his possible future family, as the next section makes clearer. Browning also continues to add caesuras between the two parts of an iambic foot. Whenever I passed her but, who passed without, much the same smile. This grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped, together there she stands. The semicolon in her but and the period in together there, as with caesuras in earlier sections, enact the separation between the Duke and the Duchess. And since the caesura in the second example is a period, meaning a full stop, the punctuation mark that most signifies finality, the end of something, this interruption can be read as further evidence of the fact that the Duke had the Duchess killed. Interestingly, this passage is also characterized by an excessive use of sibilants, not only because the word smile is repeated, but also because of words like sir and same and stopped, she, stands, and even words such as past, commands, this and as. Sibilance, as you may recall, as I told you yesterday, is the hissing sound. when the sound, the S sound is repeated, that effect is known as the sibilance effect. The sibilance creates a hissing effect which could be read in several ways, because hissing sounds are associated with disapproval and sneakiness. Remember, snakes hiss. It could show how much the Duke disapproved of the Duchess, or it could show how slippery and evasive the Duke is about what he actually had done to his former wife. Lines 47 to 53. To quote the text, "Will it please you rise? We will meet the company below then. I repeat, the Count your master's known munificence is ample warrant that no just pretence of mine for dowry will be disallowed, though his fair daughter's self, as I have avowed at starting, is my object." The Duke's motives for telling the emissary about the Duchess became clear, and that is money. The Duke tells his guest that they now must leave the painting and go downstairs to meet the rest of the group, where they will collectively debate the bride's dowry or the money the Duke will be given in exchange for the marriage. The Duke, ever the master manipulator, even tells the emissary that he expects that any amount of money he requests will be granted, because the Count, in other words the prospective father-in-law, is so famously generous. And since, as he has previously stated through the story, the Duke never stoops to debate with people, he just resorts to possible assassination when they do not sufficiently value his name and rank. The emissary and bride's family are facing a subtle death threat if they do not acquiesce to his commands. In other words, if they do not give in or agree or accept his commands. The Duke pretends to be less financially motivated when he claims that the bride-to-be has been his object or goal from the start. But given all that the emissary has heard recently, such a claim is unlikely to set his mind to rest. The entire poem details the Duke's investment in having not a flesh and blood wife, but a painting of one, which he can entirely control. Objectification of women turned chillingly literal. The Duke's claim that the new bride is his object is likewise distressingly literal. With the dowry, she is literally an object, a good about to exchange hands with an associated price, and she will most likely suffer the same fate as the previous wife from his collection. In this section, Browning again uses caesuras to split up iambs. In line 48, I quote, "The company below then," I repeat. The period after then splits up the unstressed syllable then and the stressed syllable I. Likewise in line 53, at start ing is my object. The comma splits up the unstressed ing of starting and the object stressed word is. It is significant that these caesuras continue at the end of the poem even when the Duke is no longer discussing the Duchess, even though previously they had been used to show the division between the couple. Perhaps Browning has them continue to appear when describing the impending marriage between the Duke and the new Duchess as another way of suggesting that she will suffer the same unpleasant future as the last Duchess. Lines 53 to 56. "Nay, we will go together down, sir. Notice Neptune, though, taming a seahorse, thought a rarity, which Claus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. The Duke makes one final threat through art when he points out the statue of the Roman god Neptune taming a seahorse. As with the painting, the Duke directs the emissary's attention towards the statue and has choreographed the scene. In both cases, he boasts about its creator, this time Klaus of Innsbruck, and emphasizes the work that went into the art, which in turn shows off his own wealth and influence. And as with the painting, which the Duke used as a warning that he would harm anyone who threatened his authority or did not praise him sufficiently, this statue too has a similar message. The Duke sees himself as an all powerful god, like Neptune, who will tame and quash anyone and everyone who crosses his path, from seahorses to brides to emissaries. It is no coincidence that the final word of the poem is me, the only person the Duke truly cares for. One interesting difference between the depictions of the two works of art, however, is that with the painting the Duke asks the emissary to sit, whereas here he commands the emissary to go downstairs together with him, as though the emissary tried to run on ahead and warn the rest of the family. With this difference in language, Browning shows us that the Duke has already begun taming the emissary and the family as he did the Duchess, and that there is perhaps as little hope for them as there was for Neptune's seahorses. This taming in action is further reflected in the meter and caesuras of the final lines. Although the poem is predominantly iambic, the word taming in the line, taming a seahorse thought a rarity, is a trochee. By starting a line with a trochee, Browning breaks the established metrical pattern in the same way that the Duke himself hopes to break and tame the in-laws and his future wife. Browning also unsettles the metrical pattern of this section by using caesuras to split up iambs, this time including it 3 times in 3 lines. At starting is my object, me, we will go together down, sir. Notice Neptune though, taming a seahorse, thought a rarity. The 3 caesuras, that is the period in object ne and in sir notice, and the comma in horse thought, continue a pattern from earlier in the poem. By using the pattern associated with dominance and controlling the Duchess in a section about meeting the in-laws, Browning implies that the Duke will continue to tame and break down his potential new family's objections. With this, we end the line by line analysis of the poem My Last Duchess. In the next section, we'll look at the themes and symbols, etc. In other words, we will see the analysis of the poem. Thank you for today.